Welcome back, everybody. This has been an incredible program. Rebecca Damon, our National Executive Vice President, and David White, our National Executive Director, are joining us as we near the end of our Stop the Hate Week Summit. We're turning our focus on Latino performers. And to open our discussion, it's great to welcome back Ezra Knight, who our audience had the pleasure of hearing from yesterday during our panel on Middle Eastern North African inclusion. Really great work, Ezra. Thank you for that. We're working, Ezra, really hard during this week. Ezra is a SAG-AFTRA National Board member and a national co-chair of the Ethnic Employment Opportunities Committee, as well as a veteran of screen and stage. He's appeared on Broadway and Pretty Woman, and in a long list of TV series, including Billions, Blacklist, Law and Order, so much more. So prolific, the Renaissance man. Welcome, Ezra.
Thank you, Madam President. Pleasure to be involved. And this has been an amazing week. And this has also been an amazing week on top of an amazing year. And so I just wanted to take just a moment out of my 2 minutes here quickly to just give a moment of heartfelt consideration for all those, any of those who have lost their lives in the good fight for equality and inclusion. So with the weight of that balanced to the light of this week, I just want to have a moment of silence for all those who have fought and been lost in that battle for equality and inclusion. Ashe, thank you. And hola mi gente. The needle has not moved on the Latino inclusion on screen, which has hovered around 6% for a community that is comparatively 19% of the US population, and the growing numbers of influence and cultural and political significance. So the title of this panel today is Tired of Talk, How Information Can Drive Latino Inclusion. And as a member of the Black community, sick and tired of being sick and tired is a translatable feeling that's inspiring the belly of this discussion. Latinos collectively have great media consumer power and giant buying power. So when you look at these numbers, it's understandable why the fatigue of lack of inclusion would be very, very profound. So the question is, what can we do? This week is about those questions and about a discussion that answers and speaks to those questions and hopefully to some action. But on the positive side, we have a young, socially conscious Latino population that can be leveraged with connectivity towards better representation for performers and roles. And so this discussion will bring up lots of questions, like how does Latinos in broadcast, cable, and streaming, how do those numbers weigh versus the mainstream population? And what about the breakdown for Latinas? And how do we consider the additional layers of misogyny and sexism and other forms of discrimination that women experience in this space? And how does representation reflect for Latinos in the demographics of numbers and ages of 18 to 34 versus 35 plus? So how do these performers' opportunities also reflect across the board with the news presentations and other forms? So there's lots of questions and lots of dynamics that will be touched on here that we're going to speak to. The we, in this case being the wonderful Michelle C. Bonilla, who is a writer, producer, and actor in film and television and theater, and a wide variety of credits. NCIS, New Orleans, Clemency, the Casa Grandes, and it's fair to say so many others. And as well as being an activist, an actor who is an activist, she is also a representational for the LGBTQ rights and has been doing work there as well. Along with her in this conversation will be Stacie de Armas, who is the Senior Vice President of Diverse Insights and Initiatives for the Nielsen Company. And so with all these questions and energies around this, let me no longer delay and pass the baton royally to Michelle C. Bonilla, our moderator for this discussion. Go, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Ezra. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And thank you to Stacie de Armas, who is here to have this conversation with me, working for the Nielsen company. Isn't the Nielsen company responsible for the TV ratings and all that, Stacie?
We are. I think when people hear Nielsen, they do generally think of us just in terms of TV ratings and measuring perhaps broadcast, cable and streaming content. We measure a lot more than that, and we also conduct social and economic research to help us contextualize what people are watching and why and where they're watching it, and other social influences that impact how we are consuming content and where. So there are two parts of our, of the work that we do. We do a lot more than just ratings, and really happy to be here today. And thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about our work in this space.
Absolutely. And didn't you guys had this amazing report come out called the Nielsen's Divergence Intelligence Series for 2020? When did the Nielsen company start collecting this data for the Diverse Intelligence Series?
So the one we are talking about, I think today, we have a pretty broad library of reports on diverse intelligence, everything from Native Americans in content all the way through Hispanic and Afro-Latinx, and we're releasing a piece shortly on LGBTQ and the trans community. But very specifically, the one I think we're talking about is being seen on screen. That data is collected originally from 2019 data. We also have a new drop of data for 2020, and it allowed us to take a really unique and specific look at content in a way that we haven't before. So as we started, Michelle, this conversation, at Nielsen, we talk about audience ratings, right? And measurement around audiences. So what people are watching. So we're measuring the number of people around a piece of content. Being seen on screen, and this additional Diverse Intelligence Series report you're talking about specifically isn't us measuring audiences per se. It's taking a look at the content through a similar lens. So who's present in that content and how long, and to the degree to which they're present. So rather than just who's watching, we can see who's present on screen by diverse identity group, the amount of time that they, we roll in the amount of time and the visibility of people on screen. So we're not just looking at individual incidences of occurrence, but really whether or not a piece of content is diverse and in what ways.
Mm-hmm. And so how does this latest study reflect not only the amount of Latino representation, but the nuances of it, like the intersectionality and what genre the Latinos are starring in?
Well, one of the really neat things about this work and about marrying these data sets together, so we have, of course, the audience data, which allows us to look at how, the most viewed content. So we can really take a look at content that's making its way into living rooms versus content that's produced that perhaps, isn't among the most viewed. So we can get a good picture through a number of dimensions around diverse content. But this specific report, and as it relates to Latinx, allowed us to see the visibility Latinx people, actors, cast, talent have in content through a bunch of different ways, right? We can look at it by platform, so broadcast, cable, streaming. We can look at this same data by total. We can look at it certainly by genre, and we can look at it by network. So it gave us a bunch of different ways to take a look at what on-screen visibility looks like in content and by platform, so we can understand where there are gaps, where there's great work being done, and where perhaps there needs to be more opportunity afforded to Latino talent. This report also, Michelle, lets us look at more than 60 identity groups. So today we're going to talk about Hispanic and Latinx communities, but certainly we looked at Afro-Latinx. I have some data there to share. We looked at LGBTQ. We looked at Southeast Asian, East Asian, a number of identity groups, so we could get a really granular picture of what inclusion truly looks like on screen.
Yeah, I took a look at this report as well, and it was remarkable to me that just in terms of, let's just say, broadcast television, here we are, community, 18.8% of the population in the country are Hispanics, and only in broadcast television, so NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, only 5.1% are represented by Latinos, Hispanic and Latino population. So it's very interesting to me, because how representative are Latinos in the broadcast, cable, and streaming versus the population? I mean, so we have broadcasts that say 5.1%. How do the other ones fare?
So in the 2019 data, when you roll it all up, considering all the platforms, so broadcast, cable, and SVOD, which is subscription video on demand, when you roll it all up, it was about 5.5% of overall representation, each platform having a different level, right? We know that there are some places, in particular streaming does a remarkable job of there being more stories and perhaps more diverse people featured in content. But when you roll it up for 2019, it was just about 5.5%, which is, to think that we are so far, I mean, we're, nearly 7 years from Oscars So White and from all of the movements in the industry to bring forward more diversity, that we're still hovering at around 5% for representation it was disappointing as we were looking at this research, but we also recognize that without partnering with the industry to bring forward this data and these metrics, the industry needs this data to set benchmarks so that we can all advance together. We know that there are, we have amazing partners that are doing some of this work in this space as well. There are a number of organizations that produce annual reports that share this data, and we think that's really important, and we absolutely support those organizations and that dialogue. But we also recognize that we were uniquely positioned to lean in and not just look at what representation looks like on screen, but couple that with audience data so we can really understand what visibility looks like. So as you shared, 5.5% was last year. That was the year 2019. 2020 data was a little bit different. 2020 data, it looks like the overall is, it's not that much different, Michelle. It's 6.3. It's like a tiny, and that's a reflection of a number of things. But overall it was up, and if we even call it up, it's about the same 2020 was to 2019. It was a difficult year for a lot of reasons. A lot of amazing shows weren't renewed last year. So the bottom line is we have a long way to go, not just for overall Hispanic representation, but in particular for Latinas. Hispanic women are significantly underrepresented, and I boldly will say near invisible in content.
And what is that breakdown for the Latinas?
Latina share of screen is in the 2020 data is about 2.5% visibility on screen.
Oh, that just that really hits me. And I can bring my own, and it's, gosh, I wish I had that data, as a comparison, because judging by the 2019 data, and I can tell you with my own experience that going out and auditioning as an actor, there's two ways I can go out as an actor. They literally ask for a Latina, and I will go out with my other fellow Latinas for a part, and one of us will get it. So there we are. We're clicked up on that radar.
And there's one.
Yes, there's one. But then what happens is that they open it up to where I go out. I typically go out for 1-hour dramas, some sort of, in that genre mostly. And I go out either with my African-American sisters and my Asian sisters, and then there's the Latina women who are also, and inevitably it is almost, from my own experience, I can say that one of my African-American sisters gets the part. And it's very interesting looking at the 2019 data, that they, even though they're women and there's a notch down, there's a huge jump in the African-American representation other than Latinas. So inevitably, when I go out, I'll speak for myself, when I go out and I audition for this, I always kind of look back, who got that part, who got that role? And almost indefinitely, it's an African-American woman. Not that they shouldn't get it, but in terms of representation, what do I go out for? I go out for a detective or for a lawyer or for, and it's interesting because what that is saying to me, and certainly the 2019 report said something that was very profound to me. It says presence is not the same as representation. So what that says to me and other little Latina girls who are looking at me and at television, that I don't get to be the detective. I don't get to be the lawyer. I get to be maybe represent in a family that's looking at a burning building and they're trying to save my family and I have a little bit of accent on me or I have a Spanish surname. So it is actually very interesting to hear that demographic come up, and it just kind of pierces me because being 18.8% of the population and having this huge number of buying power, it's astonishing to me that this still exists.
And you have brought up such an important point, and it's actually, so I shared a bunch of numbers, right? This is what representation looks like. There are gaps, but as you're talking, and this is the part of the research we don't always get to talk a lot about on these sorts of things, but since you brought it up, you're an astute researcher. I'm going to go right into it. You talked about, really, I mean, it's such a perfect segue. We didn't plan this, but talking about the themes in which, when we are present on television, and I'm speaking of Latinas, the themes in which we are present in, right? So this is what you're saying, which is so even though you're saying, Black women are perhaps being cast in some of the places where you're going out instead of Latinas, the truth is, when you take a good look at the types of roles, or in particular, the themes around that content, Black women, Hispanic women, women of color tend to be cast in content that has themes that are very different from white women. So as an example, when, and to circle back on this identity research, who do we have permission to be? And when when young girls are watching this content and they're seeing themselves on screen, are they seeing themselves in those roles that give them permission to fall in love, to get married, to be an attorney, right? So we did some work on that where we took a look, and to get a little bit in the weeds, we took a look at the shows where Latinas have the highest representation on screen. So looked at that content, and we compared that to, we looked also at the shows that they had both things, the highest representation on screen and the most Latinas in the audience. We took a subset of those shows that met both of those criteria, and we said, what are the themes that are present in this content, right? What are we seeing? And for shows where Latinos were both represented on screen and represented in the audience, the themes that came out for that content were police stations, dysfunction, melodrama, suspense, and emotional. For Black women, it was emotional and rivalry, investigations, personal relationships. And for white women, who, when they had the highest presence on screen and also the highest presence in the audience, how are white women seeing themselves depicted in content? Around themes that carry daughters, husbands, love, friendships, family homes, country. And right away when I saw that piece of research, I thought, we have something here, because this is so much more than representation on screen. This has the power, this kind of data and research has the power to change society, because it's not only how we see ourselves in identity research, right? But you think about identity formation, it's not just for how Latinas are seeing themselves and building our identities around who we have permission to become. It's around how other people see who we are and determine who we are, right? And build their thoughts and opinions about our community. So it's much more, of course, how we see ourselves is really important. But if you think even about the events of the last, year and a half, 2 years, 3 years, and how the opinions around our community and other communities, we're not giving the rest of America the opportunity to see us in anything other than police stations, dysfunction, and melodrama. So it's no surprise, right, that there are these opinions and ideologies around who we are. So there's a lot of work to be done here. The first step is understanding where we're present, where we're erased and missing in content, and not just overall by platform, but by genre. I did a little bit of genre research for
please tell
this
me.
conversation. Okay, I'll tell you. So I went back, and I'm so glad I did, so I'm glad this came up. By genre, the most representation that, and again, deeply underrepresented and nearly erased. But for 2020, the genres that had the highest representation of Latinas were soaps, and that might be a function of the endemic networks, right? So think of Univision and Telemundo, but Western, fantasy, crime drama, dance, and fashion. So, but let me get to the genres where we had not low, I mean zero. So there's the in-between, which we'll talk about, where we're presenting crime and horror and politics and mystery, but where there is zero representation in the top content on television. American history, that one broke my heart right away. We're such a significant, there's zero representation and themes around in those genres. Biography, business and financial, educational, historical dramas, history, home improvement, house and garden, science, technology, travel, zero. And I think it's no wonder. There's so much work to be done. And I do feel like as we start with, greenlighting content that better represents who we are, our stories, and brings in Latinas and Latinos in those key roles. I mean, if there's many steps in this process to get to the end game, but certainly that's where it has to begin. And I feel like bringing forward this content, this data on behalf of Nielsen is a very important first step for the industry in understanding where they're at and setting some benchmarks for improvement.
That is, like you say all of that, and the genres in which Latinos are missing and Latinas are missing it's astounding to me, because as an actor, I auditioned for these. So
they're there, right?
So they're there. So as an actor, and these are the people that Nielsen is recording the data on, how we're represented, actors going on there. We get to a certain point, and it is the decision makers. I could share with you that when you are okayed for the role, you may be a producer's choice. So number one, you have to become a producer's choice. That's how you get there. But then we have to be approved by the network. So the network takes a look at the choices. So then it's like, okay, so it seems like these really huge discrepancies in representation have to be changed at above this level.
Right.
So I'm thinking, in terms of how do we go about this? First of all, it's understanding and learning about this data. There was some data also that the report mentioned about in terms of Latinos, shows that are aimed between the 18 and 34-year-olds, and then shows that are aimed between 35 and up, and how those differ, and where do we have most of this momentum happening?
Mm-hmm. I think to address the first part of what you said first, when you think about the media ecosystem and where there are opportunities for this data to be used and for change, there are use cases for studios, for networks, for distributors, and for advertisers and brands who increasingly, this is sort of an interesting angle, advertisers and brands are looking more closely at content based on the makeup of that content if they want to invest and be supporting content based on the inclusivity and diversity of content. So that's sort of a new thing that I think is going to help turn that wheel. But for studios, this type of data, having this data in hand and evaluating it, allows them to ensure that they have an inclusive portfolio across all of their genres and all of their programming types, right? You can't expect that every single piece of content is going to represent every community perfectly, but what you can, and some content is really geared toward one community, some is geared toward others, but it'll allow them to see at a larger level, sort of an overall level, where there are gaps. And perhaps, unlock new syndication opportunities too. This is a really important component for studios. When it comes to networks, obviously they can benchmark inclusivity across, their programming and against competitors, and understand where they have an advantage, where they are better representing different diverse groups. the importance there is we know on the audience research side for Nielsen, people are increasingly seeking diverse content. They're interested in it, they want to watch it, and not necessarily, diverse, very specific diverse stories, but diverse people, right? They want to see diversity on screen that's more reflective of their individual realities. And so if we know that diverse people are seeking content that is reflective of diverse people, then it makes sense to be able to layer these data sets together so that studios, networks, producers, and others can see that making these casting decisions is actually going to generate, more ratings. It's going to generate a successful show. It's not just about the storyline, it's about who is on screen.
Great. So kind of going more towards in that direction, can you tell us a little bit about the Latinos as consumers of media and buying power, and then how we can seek and our connectivity and how we can use that to garner these changes that we're talking about?
Well, we know that Latinos are among the heaviest users of media. The African American community consumes the most overall TV content, but right behind is the Hispanic community. And really, as you were talking about earlier, it sort of varies by demographic group. One thing that I think is really important, and perhaps on the side, is Latinos are fiercely loyal, and we see this in social. We see this in with social influencers as well, and content. And we can all think of a few, and I won't name them by name, but certainly you'll think of them. There were several pieces of content that were really reflected the Latino experience so well that were perhaps canceled or weren't renewed in the past 2 years. But we know what those are, right? Because they are universally. Our community has stood behind this content, whether it made it or not. But the point is that I think networks and developers of content see that our community is seeking content that better reflects us. And with that said, that kind of content, I hope, will be more, brought forward more and more greenlit. Latinos are, they're incredible consumers. We can talk about, the buying power, but the fact is we're talking about 20% of the population of the country. And we also know nearly 20%. We know that more than 50% of the population growth over the past 5 years has come from just the Latino community. So for the entire country, all the population growth we've seen, more than half of it has come from our 19.22%. So it just makes perfect business sense and perfect story writing and storytelling sense to think about this community and telling the stories of this community in developed content.
Wow. And so that makes me think of, we've seen these movements digitally created by Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement, and now currently Stop Asian Hate. So we're seeing these different areas where people are coming together and connecting, and they're finding each other's stories. And so do you see a way that the Latinos can use a connectivity and demand more for us, more for the Latinos? And if so, what are these obstacles that we need to overcome?
Michelle, you are probably the third person that I've talked to about this week. And there's been a lot of dialogue around, around our community and concerns about the visibility of the challenges of our community specifically, right? Whether it's immigration challenges or whatever. And I know that as a community, we are wrapping our arms around our Black brothers and sisters, our Asian brothers and sisters, not just supportive, marching alongside, carrying we are with those communities who have experienced unimaginable pain. But at the same time, I have, as you've mentioned, I've heard from several people like, how is our community rallying around the support that we need and the visibility that we need? There are a number of organizations that are doing some work in the space and are really working to organize. There are certainly politicians and others that have reached out to help better understand what they can do at the state level through, and as an example, like through taxes or other things that they can offer to production companies that are going to meet certain thresholds. And what could those be? Could those thresholds be around some of this data, right? Like what casting would look like or content. And so there are a lot of different moving pieces. I think there's a huge opportunity there for us to be more vocal about what our community needs, and at the same time be beyond supportive and stand behind what we know our brothers and sisters and in the same space have been experiencing. The good thing is, as a result of the events of last summer and the racial reckoning that our country is going through, we have all stood together as a community and individually as different racial and ethnic groups forward for demanding more. So the space is there for our voice. And, you know, I'm hopeful that with more data like we're bringing forward, we are empowering community groups and others and industry to really stand forward and hold the entertainment industry in this case and others accountable.
Thank you so much, Stacie. This has been an incredible conversation. I want to thank you for coming out today and speaking with us. And certainly with 20% of the population and upticked a little bit, 6.3% still isn't enough. I do believe, like you had mentioned, that greenlighting Latino projects that come from also a place of, importance as where we stand in the community and the population as large is as important as these other stories, simply as a reflection of who we are in this world. So there's still so much to say about this. So Stacie, again, thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Big shout out and love to our union, the Screen Actors Guild, for creating this event for our community as well as the community at large. Thank you.
Michelle, thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you, Michelle, Stacie, and Ezra. Really, this is an important conversation. And the data, when you talk about it, it's part of the education. This whole idea of what we're trying to do this week is take the information, communicate, and then go into action, because we want to go and really create systemic change. So thank you so much for your insights and what you shared. It's very meaningful. You make a difference. Please stay with us for our last panel, an extremely important discussion with the LGBTQ community of performers, which will start at 2:30 Pacific time and 5:30 Eastern. Again, thank you to our guests, and we look forward to seeing you, more of you, and to seeing you, our guests who are watching today, in our next panel. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.